Hey guys, welcome back to my workbench. It's Dan here, and I'm going to be doing a couple videos on some tank car builds, building tank cars, detailing tank cars, and things like that. It's one of the lesser common things I've been asked for in terms of video content, but I have gotten a few questions in the past about this from a number of specific modelers. So I would like to return to this subject with a series of very small tank car builds leading up to more complex builds. As it turns out, I'm in the process of building a couple tank cars right now from some general service cars. I got some sodium hydroxide cars I'm building. I got an LPG car I'm building. And they're all really good models that I can use as examples of kind of how I go about building cars, tank cars, and things like that. But I think one of the best ways to start a series off of this sort is to actually show me building a kit style tank car, and this is a little bit unusual as I don't normally build lots of kits unless I'm doing some very heavy builds, and even then usually with these kits I have to do a lot of modifying to get what I want. But in this case I have a kit here on my workbench that I don't really have to do any modification to other than maybe some slight variations in the detailing, obviously. But this is a very old Railyard Models Trinity molten sulfur tank car, and this is going to be a GATX prototype that I'm doing today. And these kits are really hard to find. I know a lot of people used to have these kits stashed, and I would actually see pictures of people with hordes of these Craftsman kits in their collections, so who knows where the heck half those kits went, because you know most of those guys didn't even build these. Like, there are still hordes of these kits out there somewhere, but they're just so hard to find. Yeah, the same thing with the acid tank cars. They pop up on eBay every once in a while, but they're good kits if you can get your hands on them. These people went out of business in the 2000s, but I remember as a little kid going through their website, and one of the models I always wanted from them was one of these molten sulfur cars, and it only took about 10 years and I finally got one. So let's take a look at this kit here and see what we got, so we get a good overall view of what we're actually going to be having to look at in terms of building this. For the most part, these Craftsman kits are pretty well thought out, so for anyone with any experience with Craftsman kits, sometimes it can be a little bit more complicated. And I'm not going to go pick up some boxcar kits or anything just because there's not anything I'm looking for, but these tank cars are for the most part pretty simple. The complex part is having to do a lot of the brake rigging and handrails and things like that, but I have a lot of experience doing those kinds of parts, being that I've scratch built so many at this point. I started building tank cars back in, I think, 2016, and I started getting my experience from there on, but there's a lot of little bags of kit parts and things like that. You can see we got little saddles, bolsters, all kinds of little resin parts that we're going to have to cut out when the time comes. Got a pair of trucks. I'm not sure whose trucks these are, but they're pretty good trucks, so I'm going to probably use these in the end for this kit as well, also because that's what the kit's designed to take, and I don't feel a curious need to go exploring, changing things around. And this is the tank body, pretty straightforward. You can see the nice moldings, a lot of areas here you'd have to obviously mark, and then one of the downsides with these kinds of kits is that there's a lot of areas that you're going to have to clean up where there's some little mold lines, things like that. You can see the end shields come off, so we can add weight to this if need be. Right out of the pack, I will say the car has actually got some heft to it. It's pretty heavy. But yeah, you can see there's a lot of little holes, things like that. Now, I am going to have to drill a couple of these out, I think, but everything else I'm going to probably butt to the car body. And everything else is going to be glued anyway, so I'm not too worried about that. It might be a problem later, but we'll see. I got the decals, various decals, as you can see, for various things. Not very good quality decals, but for the time period, these were okay. I'm not going to be using most of these because I have my own custom decals I'm going to be using, and also you got to remember this kit is meant for a 90s prototype, so this would have had older data and other things like that. It wouldn't have had, inspection tables and things like that that you see on, or at least are required on all modern cars, including the stenciling. The stenciling is a lot different now too, so I'm not going to be using these decals. I might still salvage them for some other projects later on, but inside the box we have a bag of brass pieces and fittings, and as you can see, those will come in handy for making our railings. we have some more molded plastic parts. Number of these parts we'll need for sure, but a couple of them I'm not sure about. Like just some different parts that we can definitely upgrade here, like the brake wheel. The brake wheel's not incredibly detailed, so like I said, we can definitely have room for improvement in making some different details. Things like the placards, for example, stuff like that is very chunky. Again, with the technology that they had at the time, it was good quality, but in comparison with everything that we have now, not so much. So I'm going to probably be omitting a lot of these parts, except for like brake rigging details is really what I'm primarily focused on. Hatch details I'll need, but everything else I'm going to omit or decide if I need or not. You have a little hard disk, which is interesting. Very old CDR hard disk, a pocket disk. Which I do not think I'll be able to use because I can't access that, so I'm going to put that away. And then we get into the really fun photo etch parts. Look at all these. Lots and lots of photo etch parts, lots of complex little bits and bobs and things like that. That's going to take a lot of time to have to cut out and get access to, but well, part of the process. So now you can see all these little pieces. It looks complicated, but honestly I'll be able to figure a lot of this out as I go. What I'm going to end up doing is, before I do anything on the top of this tank body, I'm going to be doing all of the detail work to the underside first. So you start with your bolsters, start with underbody piping first, then you can worry about all the cosmetic stuff up top. You worry about the stuff on the bottom because that's going to be a lot more complex. You worry about getting your railings on and things like that. And of course it helps to get reference photos too. If you're in a similar situation like me where there's no instructions and the only instructions you do have is a little micro disc like this, I don't have anything to run this. So I can't pull up the instructions, so this is going to be a little bit of eyeballing, so a lot more eyeballing than I initially thought. But again, I have confidence because I've built plenty of tank cars before, and everything for the most part, as long as you put your bolsters on and things like that, everything else is a cakewalk for the most part. Alright, so let's go ahead and see. I don't have anything else in the box. Move that aside. I'm going to go ahead and throw our decals in that, so I don't need those. Alright. Interesting. Well, I'm pretty optimistic about this, and I'm actually very excited to get started on building this, so let me go ahead and start figuring some things out, and we will go from there. I did do a little digging online too as an extra resource, and I found this little picture of a kit that got sold on eBay, and it actually shows what the bolsters look like and how everything's for the most part laid out on the underbody, and also the way everything's positioned on the top. This is what we're going to use as a reference to build this car. So this is actually really handy, really helpful. And if we look at this picture, there's also a picture of the underbody detailing, which is, again, very helpful. So you can see the brake layout, everything there, all the photo etch parts and everything like that. All that good stuff. The only thing I'm worried about is the outer railings. I'm looking at the kit, and I'm trying to figure this out, and yeah, I gotta say I'm not too excited to have to use this brass photo etch to try to create these, because I don't see specific pieces that indicate, oh, this is what you used. I mean, there's no numbers, there's no markings on these to discern them, so again, without those instructions it's a little hard to figure out. So yeah, I don't really know exactly how I'm supposed to build those. I think these pieces on the ends are what are going to be my outer railings, but to be real honest with you, at this point I think what I'm going to do is probably just scratch build my own and just be easier, and then just lay the photo etch piece. Again, it seems more complicated than it really is. I've done it before, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's annoying. It's definitely annoying. So yeah, we're going to have to definitely do that for sure. But again, not the end of the world. And then the brake rigging, we're just going to have to kind of try to eyeball with the little pieces that I do have here and there. Little components. So again, yeah, there's just a little bits, little things like that we're going to have to figure out, but again, we'll get it done. So now we can look at a prototype car. This will give us a lot of really helpful information on how this is actually built. What we're focusing on right now is these outer railings and the walkways. We got to build those, and obviously this will give us help with our brake rigging as well, which you can see all here. And there's a really good shot at the bolster, which is what we're working on right now. So if we look at the car body, I've already glued on some essential pieces like the coupler pads, both ends, and then we have the little guard for the discharge outlet there. So these are the pads that we got to install, and what's really helpful here is in the photo you can kind of see how they're actually installed. So I'm kind of trying to use this as a reference to get this figured out. What it looks like is going on here is these pieces, I'm assuming, are down here somewhere. So that's what I got to try to figure out. I got to try to get those aligned, and then once I get those built, then I can build these frames on top of it. So wow, what an interesting little project here. So it took a little bit of figuring out, but I got these pieces installed according to prototype photos, and I've actually modified them to accept my own outer railing and walkway supports. What am I going to use to make my own walkway supports? Well, it's going to be some material that I actually really prefer here, and the material that I'm using is Plastruct Beam Styrene Channel 90531. Why am I using this material? Because it has this little channeling in it, which allows me to have a rigid, sturdy piece of styrene with a little channel that I can drill a hole in and install a grab iron through. And keep in mind, we're going to have to install 8 grab irons total all around the car body. So this is going to go basically out like this, and as you can see, I did a test hole there for a grab iron. So I'm going to be able to poke holes in this for grab irons and then run it all the way around the car. Sorry, if that makes sense. So this is how I'm going to do this. I'm going to cut various strips to size. I'm going to poke holes in all this first, and then I'll be able to actually glue this onto the car. Alright, so it got a little bit more complicated, somewhat quicker than I thought it would, but I was prepared for this, and I had material on hand, which was a good thing. Let me show you guys how I actually constructed this whole framework here. For one thing, when you're building this, it needs to be a little bit sturdy. On my side here was the fact that the prototype actually has some relatively thick framework on the end here. So I was able to use several different grades of styrene to actually build this framework. But basically what I did was I took these little strips of the channel, obviously put my little holes in them, my little holes for the grab irons, which I've installed on the ends only so far. Glued all those to the coupler box after getting all the framework done. Then I was able to take another thinner piece of styrene strip, in this case this type of styrene. I cut this into thin strips, glued the sections on top all the way around to create this square frame to support the actual photo etch walkway. Now I'm going to be using photo etch walkway strips, and these are actually from a Plano LPG walkway kit. The reason I'm using these is only because I had to scratch build and fabricate my own walkway supports and framing on the ends. If I was to use the provided pieces on the kit, then I would be using the provided walkways to make it work, but because I had to scratch build this, I opted to just use these separate pieces. But if you're going to build this kit, if you have one of these, then you would want to cut these frame sections out, bend them, and use those, and then obviously these walkways would just fit right on top of them. But like I said, I had to make my own, so I used my own pieces of photo etch. And this is why it's nice if you're going to build tank cars, or really any other rail car for that matter, you have lots of stock parts like these on hand, because if I didn't have these, I would have been sunk, because then I would have made mistakes, I would have had to try to re-replicate the framework to match these, which isn't the worst thing in the world. I would have had to modify it, but then it would have looked strange. But I think it was a good compromise. I think it fit pretty well on the factory portion of the kit with those bolster pads and everything, and then attaching those to the coupler box. I think it worked out pretty well. And it was relatively easy. It was just time consuming, and it took a long time for sections of glue to dry because I'm gluing styrene plastic to resin. And this resin's very slippery, right? It's very glassy, very smooth, and it takes a little while for the glue to actually dry up. But Plastruct cement will work. Regular cyanacrylate adhesive will work, super glue obviously, but you really got to give it a lot more dry time than if you were just, say, hammering out styrene to styrene. This is styrene to resin, so it does take a little bit more dry time. I ended up breaking off a couple of these pieces because I got a little impatient and started moving around, and then I was just laying it on its side. I kept busting pieces off, so you really got to take your time letting this dry up just a little bit more, so that's just a word of caution. Again, I guess that applies for really any resin kit. But at this point I'm pretty much ready to install the walkways on the ends. And if I take my tweezers, obviously these are going to have to get bent back into shape because they're a little warped coming off of the sprue, but these walkways will just fit right on top, basically just like that. And of course it'll be see-through, so that'll be a nice little detail. Everything else in terms of detail on this end, I think on this end I'm going to have to install the brake rigging. So there's going to be the air reservoir tank on this side, the valves on this side, and then all of the piping, which I'm going to have to fabricate. And again, I'm going to have to use my prototype photos to just try to refer to the layout of the piping, being that I can't refer to instructions. In hindsight, I really do kind of wish I could kind of peek at the instructions on that disc, but I can't, so that's what it is. But I'll still make it work. Like I said, we're just compromising here with this and making little details work one little bit at a time. In terms of other end details, I'm contemplating if I really want to add the air hoses and coupler lift bars. I could, but I will say that I found over time after I've installed the coupler lift bars and air hoses on multiple cars, is a lot of times with the coupler swing and everything like that, you know, we have to compensate for the fact that your couplers are going to swing a lot more than what's normal in the real prototype world. And you have to allow for a lot more space. And what I find is that when you have these nice little coupler lift bar details and things like that you install secondhand, a lot of times they get knocked off. And obviously there's ways you can try to compromise with it, but then it starts looking more unrealistic if your coupler lift bar is, say, mounted to your coupler pocket compared to if it's extended out underneath the coupler, which is more prototypical, looks more realistic, or if you have your air hoses sticking out farther compared to having them tucked way underneath the model. That's why a lot of times these manufacturers, these modeling companies, when they do the air hoses, they're mounted way farther back. As a prime example, here's a Intermountain air hose, and on their 4750s you can see how they mount the air hose way up on the coupler pocket. So it's not prototypical necessarily. The hose is way up there on the coupler pocket, and it's farther back, whereas in real life that air hose would be extended really out towards where the shank is in reality. But it's a compromise in model railroading because you have to be able to allow for the coupler to be able to obviously swivel back and forth. So it's a common problem I encounter when I do any kind of detailing to my own models. So you know, I can probably get away with it, but then I risk those parts breaking off, and it is a little annoying when you have a nice custom-built model like this, and after a couple of years of service, one day you pull it out of the box and you notice, oh, my couple lift bar is missing, or one of the air hoses is knocked off and missing, and it's just irritating, you know. So I've started kind of cutting back some of that detail, at least on the ends, when I do builds like this, just for that reason. But if I can get away with it on this model, I may still add those parts, but we'll see how far we progress into this. But anyways, yeah, there's the walkways on the ends. So tomorrow morning I'll install these walkways, and I'll continue to just do some detailing and prep work to get the braking and everything fabricated. So in the next shot, you guys will see all of the brake rigging completed, at least on this end of the car. Or actually, dummy. This is the brake end, obviously, because this has the mount for the brake wheel, which is another little piece that I'm going to have to kind of figure out because there's no mounting for this. So I'm probably going to have to fabricate that from styrene too, but I'll do that tomorrow morning. Alright, so it's been a good morning so far. I got all the walkways fitted and installed. I got the brake equipment on. Got the valve there, all the associated piping. That's all phosphor bronze wire. Added the railing, hand bent that, and then added a little stanchion there. Brake wheel housing, that's an upgraded Tichy piece with custom supports made from styrene. Air tank, that's a second-hand piece. It's a lot better and more realistic looking than the cast piece offered in the kit. And then on this end here, I got the walkway installed with the railing and the supports. So that's looking pretty good. So we have most of the main build construction done, other than having to build the walkways on the top. Everything else, the really complex stuff, is finished. The next complex part is going to obviously be the brake rigging. But usually the brake rigging only takes me a couple hours. Once I look at prototype photos, I can kind of route everything together and kind of eyeball things. It's not going to be exactly 100% prototypical in the end of the day, but this isn't a model made to win a prototype model or a contest or anything like that. This is to look good running down the track in a train of 100 other molten sulfur cars, ideally. So I'm just going to try to get it as close as I can and make it look as realistic as possible with the pieces that I do have. So that's going to be the next step, and in the next clip you guys will see this fully plumbed. Alright guys, so another big step is out of the way here. I got the brake rigging done. It's a combination of readily made parts and scratch made parts. The main brake air line there is made from phosphor bronze wire, 25-inch wire, and then I have little supports made for it. I have the little pipe there, that's from, well, that in this part here, and this little outlet here, that's all from a Walthers Proto Sulfur car. And I don't like to have to scrap these, but I did buy this car as a part source, and it comes with a lot of brake rigging components like that. This one was already severely damaged. A lot of this damage when I got it was like this, but I'm not using this as a sulfur car. I'll be able to recycle this car body if need be at some point in time. That's why I'm holding on to it. So there's a lot of valuable components like end details, coupler pockets, Trinity style bolsters. That's why I have this car. Matter of fact, this is going to probably be used for a build later on for a chlorine tank car. But since I don't need any of these brake components, I just harvested the brake components from this car and swapped them mostly onto my model here because they were actually fairly similar according to the photos, so I figured I could get away with it. So I did a couple little styrene bits and bobs here to make it work, and honestly I think it looks pretty good. I think it's a good compromise, and it still fits pretty well, so I'm pretty happy with that. I think that that worked out really well now. So we got that out of the way, and at this point in time we're ready to add our little supports for the handrail running along the outside edge here. Those parts are going to be these personnel railings with the supports. I got spare parts for that that I can use, so that should work pretty nice as well. And that's what I'm going to install next. It's now Monday, and today I went ahead and added the personnel railing, guardrail, and the stanchions to the car body. As you can see, those are installed on both sides, and I have the car propped up. You'll notice I removed the railing on the end, and this was for the aspect of painting. Got a little apprehensive there, and what kept happening is as I was moving the car body around, those railings kept getting bumped off. So from this point on, those are prepared, but they're going to stay off until the car is actually painted. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep breaking them off, and I'm going to repair them 100 times, so I'm trying to avoid that. What I've done today, other than the railing, is actually built the man walkways on the top of the car using the photo etch brass from the kit, or rather laser cut brass from the kit. And then I created my own stanchions from scratch using styrene. This was the simpler option. I just basically made these little L-channel pieces and braces and then installed them onto the car body. And I tried to keep them as straight as possible. If you're going to build your own stanchions, they absolutely have to be straight. And even still, revisions may have to be made when I actually start building the handrails themselves, which will be made from the brass wire, which I got right here. Hopefully I can get around to doing that tonight. Basically, I'll have to lay the stanchions across like this, and go from there. And then once I build those, then I can go back and add all the little hatches and fittings on the top of the tank body. But that's going to be a process that's going to eat up a lot of time, so that's why, again, I wanted to get all the underbody stuff and everything like that out of the way first before I attempted to do this. So this is all pretty much prepped for the railings, but I think it turned out pretty good. Again, it was a lot easier doing it this way than trying to make the kit photo etch brass parts work, because they're so thin and dainty that these are going to get bent, they're going to get damaged, and it's only a matter of time before something like that happens. You know, they're going to get handled. They're going to get touched, someone's going to bump into them, and it's not worth trying to have that risk of, you know, having stuff damaged, having to sit there and try to repair it all the time. I'm not doing that, and my experience with using photo etch pieces for this kind of style of walkway and things is usually pretty detrimental over time, so I'm just avoiding that and having something more sturdy like brass pieces and styrene pieces to support that. So at this point I've gotten the basic cross brace sections installed on this car. As you can see, the photo etch pieces are looking nice again. All the hatches are installed here. What I want to touch on in this segment is an aspect that I haven't really shown before, and that's actually going to be making your own brass railings. I think that that's something that really does look nice if you can do it properly. I see a lot of guys try to hand bend their own railings and it just looks really sloppy. There's definitely a way to do this where you can get good results every single time. It takes a little bit of trial and error, a little bit of patience, but eventually you learn how to do this and you get it down relatively well. So what I'm going to do is show you guys my method for actually bending these brass wire sections, and of course it doesn't just have to be brass, it can also be phosphor bronze wire. Piano wire will also work, although I've spoken my cautionary tales about piano wire in the past, because I think everything that I used, from making my own handrails, making my own stuff for tank cars, hoppers, anything, grab irons, I used to use a lot of piano wire. Piano wire is very hard to cut. It's a steel wire, it's very tough, it's very resilient, and it will wear out a pair of nippers like this, or even cutters and different tools like that very quickly. Brass wire is the absolute best. Second best is phosphor bronze wire. Both of these are relatively cheap, affordable, and easy to find, although the brass wire can be a little bit tricky, I will say. I don't know who makes brass wire components now, so anytime I can get brass wire on hand, it's definitely nice. And I can make all the railings for this tank car from this point on with just one section of wire like this. This is about, what is this? Let's use our little measurement here. This is roughly a 6-inch section. Yeah, 6 inches. And within 6 inches, if we keep all of our bends pretty precise, we won't waste a lot of this material. We'll be able to cut out a lot and still probably have a little bit of a section left over to do brake components or something like that for another project. So you definitely try to be as cautious as you can when bending this wire. It's not about wasting material. If you need to practice your bends and different things like that, you can, but you are going to use a lot more wire very quickly. Now, the style of tank that we're going to be doing features these bends, and this is still a very common feature on these cars where they have a very smooth transitional bend. Some cars are a little bit more of a squared off end, and others, like these older cars especially, are a rounded curved end, and that's what we're going to be recreating. And the first ones that we're going to be making are the curved railings here. And on the kit, it's exactly what you're seeing here. You would have to bend these out and then you would install them on the photo etch stanchions, but in this case it'll be easier because we've made our own styrene stanchions, which are much more sturdy, as you can see. I mean, these are pretty resilient, pretty tough, so this is going to definitely aid us. So what are the tools I'm using for this? Well, I definitely recommend curved needle nose pliers. You can get this at any good hobby shop. These are usually going to come in a set, but there are more professional style nippers like this that you can get online, just the individual units. I think Micromark might actually make some tools like that, but I'm not sure. And then of course nippers to cut main sections of wire off. Now, I know you guys are probably curious as to how I have toenail cutters. The reason I have these is because this gives you a nice flush butt cut, a clean cut, and this will only work with brass and phosphor bronze wire, just for the record, and anything bigger than 0.25 you're going to be struggling with. So this really only works well for smaller gauge wire like 0.5 inch, 0.10 inch, 0.15, 0.20, all the way up to 0.25. It'll cut through and it'll give you a clean cut, but 0.25 you do have the risk of roughing up your edges on your blade a lot quicker, so you need to keep that in mind. Just be aware of that. But anyways, I use the nail clippers a lot to get the more precise cut once I have the final bend. But to actually create the bend, what I like to use is a screwdriver. And this is, again, a very common hobby tool. This is what you use for the bend, and I use this for every single one of these bent railings. That way it's consistent, and that way I have the same consistent quality in my bends. What you do is I just get a rough idea of how long this needs to be in terms of length compared to the car body. So we're going straight up here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bend this piece around the wire, just like this, and then let's straighten it up a little bit, because obviously it's bent, we need to straighten it. Let's go ahead and do that. I just try to keep it as straight as I can. Okay. Let's go over to the model here. Now again, as I said before, we're going into the corner right here, and it's not going to be a very long section of railing. It's going to be about this long. So we know right there that that's where we need to cut it. So this is where something like a Sharpie, a fine tip Sharpie, will come in handy. It's important that you keep all of your lengths consistent. I can't tell you guys this enough. You got to keep things consistent when you're doing this kind of modeling. I can't stand it when you just eyeball things and then one is longer than the other. It just looks horrible, in my opinion. I'm not trying to judge people like that, but if you want stuff to look good and you want stuff to look consistent, it's a really paying attention to your measurements. And even still, with all this precision and accuracy and all this other bull crap, you can still make mistakes, and that's okay if you make mistakes. If it looks good at the end of the day and you can get away with it, get away with it. These railings up top, for example, right now are by no means perfect, but to the naked eye, they look good and they look straight, and that's what matters. If you have crooked railings and really ugly bends and things like that, then that's where you need to address it. Okay, but what we've done essentially is we've made our first bend, and now we can cut it at the mark that we have, which I will come in and do very carefully. Just make sure you're supporting that little piece in your fingers as you cut it, as to prevent it from flying across the place. It'll disappear onto your carpet or your hobby room floor, and you'll never see it again until one day it ends up in your foot. I cannot tell you guys how many times I've gotten these little boogers in my foot and in my toes, and they cut deep, and it is painful and excruciating, and you don't want to do it. So, like I said, make sure you have a good grip on it when you cut it, but not enough to squeeze it where it's going to go, you know, get pinched into your fingers too, because I've also cut them and actually had them penetrate into my fingers too, especially with sharper piano wire and things like that. That's another reason why I stopped using it. But there's our bend, essentially. Okay, pretty happy with that. And then the final test fit, obviously, I might make a little base for this, or I might just glue this straight to the brass walkway. It just depends. And then I'll make like a little bracket, a simulated bracket out of styrene, but essentially it'll go down like this, and then we'll have to make another little cut right about here. And make sure you only take little bits off at a time when you're doing these very precise jobs. Do that until you get it where you need it to be, and once you're happy with it, then you can commit to it. But right now we're just trying to make sure everything is as straight as it can be. So we're going to have to straighten it back out. It looks pretty good. So I think that's going to be a good point to be able to glue to that walkway now. And before I do that, I'm going to make one copy of this, because we need one more for the opposite side, and then I can make the longer sections that'll meet this section here for the actual ladder. Alright, so it ended up being a late night here, but I pretty much got everything tied up. I was really just trying to move along this project and get it done, because it has been taking up a little bit of time, and I got a lot of other stuff I got to do, so I was just trying to really work on getting everything mostly installed. So tonight I got the railings finished, and I think they look pretty good. I got the ladders installed. Those are a Walthers piece. The ladders themselves, those are from Walthers Proto Tank Car. Again, part source. Added the placards, photo etch placards. Cut those to size, installed them. And again, there's a look at those railings. Nice and straight. Really important. These things do get crooked in real life, but in scale form you want them as straight as possible, because if you have crooked railings then it just doesn't look right. But let's see here. Yeah, I think it overall looks really good. I'm really happy with the progression of things, and I'm excited to get this thing painted up. It's just going to be painted black, and that's pretty much going to be it for the build part. The crucial pieces we've left off obviously are the end handrails, the stirrups, and then the side grab irons, and all those components are going to be added in the final stages of the build, because obviously through handling, decaling, painting, and everything else on the car body, we pose a pretty significant threat of breaking those back off, so I want to make sure that those stay off until the last minute. So it's annoying because you have that eagerness, you want to get it done, but I gotta be patient. Excuse me guys, I'm sorry. It's been, like I said, a really late night here, but I'm looking forward to getting it done tomorrow. So that's pretty much the whole car body. Honestly, a really fun build. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I really like those scratch built components. I think it's going to really look good once it's all actually painted up and decaled. Alright, post painting and decal application here. I got all the major data on, as you can see. Ends, and this side here, all the data. All this is from Smokebox Graphics. The hazmat number is microscale. There's the decal at the top. Nice and sealed in with dull coat, so you can't see the edges of the decal film. Real nice. The next step for this point is going to be to do the white fade on the car, and then we'll be able to add the safety striping, the molten sulfur stencils, and the hazmat number here, and maybe some other little patch decals and things like that to add some more flavor to the car body, but we'll see. So far so good, and I'm really happy with that. Okay guys, we are done with this build, and I gotta say it was overall very satisfying. A lot of scratch built components combined with the kit parts and things like that. Some frustrating moments, little bits and bobs of things that I was dealing with. Some of my decals weren't adhering very well to the paint job, and they took a lot of time to actually get sealed in, even after I had decals falling off. So I was able to reseal the car, which meant I had to go back and re-weather some stuff. But I had to do it because my molten sulfur decals kept peeling off, which led to what happened here on this side, where I had to repair the decal with another stencil. So that was a little unfortunate. It looked better with the newer style font, but it's what it is. It just gives the car a little bit more character at the end of the day. So overall I enjoyed having to build my own components, and how I finished the car was I installed the grab irons at the ends, and then I made my own stirrups from brass wire. I did not use the parts I thought I would. I was going to originally use the Tichy pieces for the stirrups, and unfortunately they were flat brass brackets and they kept breaking, so I was just like, oh, screw this. So I just found it easier to honestly just to bend my own and install them. I installed the couplers, the trucks, which are Genesis trucks, so they have the spinning bearings, and then finally I also had to go in and I had to remove some material off the air tank to get the trucks to swivel properly. They don't come in contact with the brake rigging, fortunately. All that was successfully dodged. And it helped because when I was building this car, I was test fitting the trucks along the car body, and that's something I failed to mention to you guys. So if you're building a tank car or anything like that, and you're doing any kind of complex brake rigging, air tanks installation, and things like that, just make sure your trucks are going to have clearance to swivel. That's going to be the most important thing. You can have the most heavily detailed tank car in the universe, and if your trucks don't swivel and it's not going to turn or run on your model road, then what's the point, I don't build these things to display them, I build them to run and enjoy them, so I had to make some compromises there by removing some of that material, but overall it was a worthwhile thing to do, because now I got that problem solved. Got all the decals applied, lots of decals on this thing. on the ends there, all the kick-up and lots of mud splatter and kick-up spray and things like that. And then on this side here, we got lots of the rust on the placards, dirty trucks, all that really good stuff. I think the car came out really, really good, and I'm super satisfied with it. I was thinking about trying to find another one of these, and honestly, if I do find another one, I may snag it up, but I know what I would do differently with the kit and how I would build it. I would definitely build all this together in one piece instead of building strips out and then building everything. I'd rather have this entire assembly built first, and then I'd be able to slide it in and attach it to the car. It would make the build a lot easier, and that's what I recommend you guys do if you want to do that. So overall, that's another build completed, and I'm really happy with it. The next one we're going to look at is going to be another complex build, and this one's going to be even more complex, and we don't even have to cut the tank body. But we are going to have to do some end splicing and modify some parts, and it's going to be building a chlorine tank car from one of these guys. I've never done it before. I got this one as an experiment, super cheap on eBay. So we're going to be taking a look at this guy in the next build video, and we're going to see if we can detail this thing up into becoming an OLNX chlorine tank car. So you guys can stay tuned for that. Subscribe here on YouTube for more content, and I will see you in the next video, guys. Thank you for watching. Take it easy.